They're called laptops, but it's like you're not supposed to keep it on your lap. You'll get a tumor. It could be called, but you can't call it a tabletop computer. You get it? Yeah. It's the podcast that Stealthy Serpent warned you about. Welcome to Biting All the Apples, where two gals discuss one radical book. The best-selling critical and comedic masterpiece from 1895, The Women's Bible by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Greetings, peaceful listener. I'm Sarah Kay, and I'm running the whole show today because it's back to school week, and that stuff will really sneak up on you if you're busy watching the country burn. As you may know, Joanna V is a teacher, and a darn good one, too. She's out shaping, inspiring, and corralling a fresh batch of young minds this week, and I think she's shaping up her new classroom. It was switched up at the last minute because public school can be wily like that, but we should really just appreciate public school while it's still around. Am I right? You know what gals are good at, though? Adjusting, rolling with it. We've got more biblical analysis and insight from our Victorian feminists to share with the world, and it's going to take a lot more than going back to school or releasing the military on our city streets to stop us. We're pondering the book of John today, by golly, and the selections they chose to critique in the Women's Bible are short. Now, maybe compact is a better word, because there's still so much packed in to just a few pages. We've got hot topics like miracles, mothers, prejudice, and Hogshead to cover. I won't be alone, though. Joanna V and I came up with a way to include her voice in the discussion, so you'll still get to hear from the whole crew. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the Women's Bible contributors, and I hear there's another appearance from Anonymous. Me, of course, and Joanna V. Think of us as your sewing circle without that sewing part. Speaking of Joanna V, let's resurrect. Hope you enjoy that biblical pun. Let's resurrect her voice to deliver our disclaimers.
Biting All the Apples covers analysis of religious texts. Some listeners that are religious out of the need for the illusion of certainty may find the content offensive. Biting All the Apples also discusses historic texts and feminist movements. We recognize that individuals, groups, and alternative movements have been left out of mainstream history. We will note that whenever possible. We are open to additional information provided to us in the spirit of expanding knowledge.
Yeah. Expanding knowledge. This is our 20th episode. I can't even believe it. I'm hoping somebody's knowledge has been expanded. If nothing else, I know that mine has. Going through the Women's Bible during these times has been a crazy ride. I'm dying to hear if anybody else has been doing the same thing or revisiting a certain text while we're experiencing, an authoritarian takeover of the country. So working through this critical analysis that these women did 130 years ago, it's just wild. Again, I need better words for this. I'm not exactly a Victorian feminist scribe, but I do have words for some of the things that have gone down since we started this podcast. The first thing is the establishment of the White House Faith Office, and that created a dedicated office within the Domestic Policy Council to consult with faith leaders and advise on policy related to religious liberty and the work of faith-based organizations. There's something that tells me that it's not all faiths. Do you know what I'm saying? Other thing that went down since we started the podcast, an executive order and task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. They established a Religious Liberty Commission and new guidance on religious expression in the federal workplace. So we were not crazy when we thought one of the areas of focus should be on the impact of religion on American culture. And I hope that working through this book has given some new perspective on it. I know there are other texts that add to this. We'd love to hear if you have any suggestions for us. But overall, this has really shown us that for a long time, women have said that the patriarchal structure of Christianity is a problem. I guess what I'm saying is this project has been a very interesting companion during these times, and I hope it has been for you. We definitely have several more chapters in the New Testament to go. but we're winding down. There's not a ton left. I'm looking at it here. It says, we got John, and then we have Acts, Romans, and then it just they kind of do the same thing they did with the Old Testament. They like squish a bunch of books together. So we're going to keep at it. Where's my co-host? I'm talking into the void. She can't make it this week. I'm talking into the void. And what I'm going to tell you about now is the Book of John. So again, the Book of John, as I mentioned in the intro, they don't cover a lot. In the Women's Bible, it's like, it's like 5-6 pages. But they make some really interesting selections. And Elizabeth Cady gives most of the commentary with a final short analysis by our favorite writer, our new favorite writer. We have many favorites, but our new favorite writer, Anonymous. Elizabeth mentions that John is the only disciple that documents the resurrection of Lazarus and many things not mentioned in the other Gospels. So she's like, John is the only disciple that writes about certain things, but she doesn't mention in them. So we don't get to any of the unmentionables. If any of you listeners care to shed light on the uniqueness of the Gospel of John, we want to hear about it. So the first passage selected from the Book of John in the Women's Bible is John 2, 1-10, and it is the famous water into wine story. Okay, they're all like at a wedding and Mary's there. And Mary's like, hey, Jesus, they're running out of wine. They don't have any left. And then Jesus is like, that's cool. Actually, he doesn't say that. He's like, woman, don't tell me what to do. But then Mary's tells everybody, she's like, listen to whatever he says. And so, famous thing, he turns the water into wine. As with all biblical stories, you can take it for what it is that Jesus showed up and he turned water into wine and everybody was dazzled with it. If you look at it for its metaphorical qualities, the idea of water is really about purification and a ritual cleansing, and it's representing kind of like the old way. And when Jesus turns the wine, and then when Jesus turns the water into wine, it's like foreshadowing, like the blood of Christ. So those are some themes that we can think about. I just wish I knew what Joanna thought of this.
Oh, dear co-host Sarah Kay, you asked me what I thought about Jesus turning water into wine, and I thought that story was very interesting. Obviously, one of the most well-known stories, but I did find it interesting that the ladies from the Women's Bible mentioned that Joseph was probably already passed away and that Mary was related to the people of the wedding, which was obvious because she was like making orders and such, that she was probably a relative to whoever was getting married. And that they focused on just basically telling us that when he spoke to his mother, because Mary asked, hey, Jesus, we're out of wine. What are we going to do? He was like, woman, what are you telling me to do? And our ladies from the book are like, I know that sounds terrible. Obviously, we wouldn't like that even in their day of 1895. But back then, all women were just accosted, was the quote, in that manner. Even the servants. We were just, woman, get over here, do this.
Yes, I loved that too. The idea of Jesus calling his mom, his mother, woman. But Elizabeth does even point that out. She's like, everybody chill about that. That was like not that rare. And I think Joanna mentioned this in here, but Elizabeth also talks about how she thinks that Mary was related to one of the parties of the marriage. So maybe she even had, more of a personal stake in it. And I'm talking about Mary having more of a personal stake in the wedding and not just Elizabeth. We know Elizabeth has a super personal stake in her analysis of this book. So the thing that I'm finding interesting is progressively in the Women's Bible, they are doing more like Elizabeth. A lot of her responses to these sections that they pick is really, it's mostly more of a recap of what we just read, as opposed to their earlier Old Testament where they're kind of like ripping it apart and bringing in modern day examples. So, but she brings up probably Mary was related to one of the parties in the marriage, for she appears to have given directions as one of the family. As Joseph is not mentioned either on this occasion or afterwards, we may suppose that he died before Jesus entered into his public ministry. And that made me think, I'm like, we didn't even learn about what happened to Jesus's dad because he just got replaced because we're supposed to believe his real dad is God. And we're just supposed to be cool with that. Like, he gets no respect. And so with Elizabeth's very almost like factual recapping, she's writing, the Jews always kept a great number of water pots filled with water in their houses for the ceremonial washing prescribed by law. Commentators differ as to how much these pots contained, but it is estimated that the 6 contained a hogshead. And you know I love those old-timey words.
I wanted to know exactly how much a hogshead amount of wine would be, and it's like 63 gallons. So I hope that was a very large wedding, considering they had already went through the good wine. And I mean, obviously Jesus made better wine, but 63 gallons of really good wine, woo, that's a lot.
I wonder if Costco sells hogshead-sized stuff. Like, can I get like a hogshead worth of Coca-Cola or something, of Five Alive? Do you remember that drink? I remember that very well. The next passage that Elizabeth selected is talking about really, I mean, essentially the theme is prejudice. It's so all these people are outside near a well, and a woman who is a Samaritan, a Sumerian, shows up. And supposedly Jewish people and Sumerians, they're like totally prejudiced against each other. But Jesus is like, what is up with that? And that's like my short version of this story. This particular Bible passage is so interesting to read nowadays because of the extreme division that we're seeing socially and then also reinforced politically. It's almost like, has nobody read this story about Jesus at the well? Elizabeth says, as the Samaritans, see, when I say Sumerians, I can't even pronounce things when Joanna's here. So when she's not here, it's even crazier. So as the Samaritans were not generally disposed to receive the Jews into their houses, Jesus did not try to enter, but sat down by Jacob's well and sent his disciples into the town to buy some necessary provisions. The prejudices against each other were so inveterate that they never asked for a favor. Hence the woman was surprised when Jesus spoke to her. But Christ, despising all such prejudices that had no foundation either in equity or in the law of God, asked drink of the Samaritan woman. Asked drink? Asked drink. That's what it says. But after reading this passage, I was kind of like, how many memes do people need to make of Jesus being like, that's not what I said? You know how that's like kind of a thing right now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think that when we're learning about the Samaritan woman that Jesus asked for some water from, definitely prejudice. And funny because Samaritans and the Jews both have Israeli heritage, right? Basically, they differ in religion and what they believe. And I love that Christ is again depicted, and how the ladies represent him is he had no need for that in his life, and that we, in order to progress, need to get over this silliness. Water is water. It doesn't matter what you believe in. And even from the Son of God, leaving a message like this by example, it has not changed our world, sadly.
Another passage that Elizabeth picks for the book of John that seems really relevant to today is this really short one. I think it's in John 4, 1 through 3. And it's kind of talking about sins of the father, sins of the parents carrying through to the children. And that's why like a child is sick or has ailments or is disabled. And in the passage, and as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answers, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. And Elizabeth explains, she's like, people still do this today. It's almost like people want to find blame, or if anything is wrong with you, it is always like bad and about sin, when really Jesus is saying, like, even somebody that's blind, that is a work of God. Like there's godly meaning in that. The blindness may have resulted from a combination of circumstances beyond the control of the parents. The statement does not disprove the law of transmission, but simply shows that defects are not always the result of sin. That's another thing we really need to repeat, especially in America. Anybody that is disabled or sick, it's because they deserved it or they did something wrong. And it is just not so. If people were following the advice from Jesus, it is to see God in all the things. Okay, I mean, is that so hard? What's the problem? So yeah, anyways, like couple good, just be a good person lessons in there. And it looks like Elizabeth just pretty much reinforces that. Again, no biting commentary, really. But now we're getting into the story promised to us in the intro, the resurrection, the first resurrection in the Bible, or first one by Jesus, because I do think we talked about a few in the Old Testament, I think, or were people healed? I don't know. It seems like every time I research this stuff, they're like, and this shows the very first. And I'm like, I don't know. Anyways, this is the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, or Lazarus. Lazarus, I think, is a heavy metal band. I don't know. Lazarus is in Bethany, and apparently Jesus and Lazarus were like pals, so he knew them. But his sisters, Martha and Mary, send for Jesus, and they're like, Lazarus is sick, and, you got to come help him. And he's like, hold up. He's like, let him set for 2 days, which I thought was a little funny. I'm like, okay. And actually, technically, he says, when he heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Because he was like, the sickness is godly. See, it does. It refers back to the last thing that we read. But Jesus finally arrives, and Jesus is actually he's sad about Lazarus. It's actually his, close friend. So when Lazarus passes away, Jesus actually cries. It says in here, he wept. Then said the Jews, behold how he loved him. So we're really seeing this kind of emotion. We really hadn't seen that in the other stories. But after, I think it was 3 or 4 days, they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. And Jesus cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth. So he just raised somebody from the dead. And Elizabeth says it appears that Jesus was a frequent visitor at the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and felt a strong friendship for them. They lived in Bethany, 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews came out from the city to express their sympathy. So he was like a popular guy. The grief of Mary, the tears of the Jews, and his own warm friendship for the sisters affected Jesus himself to tears and groans. In appealing to divine power, Jesus wished to show the unbelieving Jews that his miracles were performed by influence from above and not by the spirit of evil, to which the source they attributed his wonderful works. Many who were said to witness this miracle did not believe. After this, Jesus again rested at the home of Mary, where she washed his feet and wiped them with the hair of her head, and then anointed him with costly spices from an alabaster box. He then went up to Jerusalem to attend the Passover. That was Elizabeth's commentary. Do you see what I mean? It's more just kind of summarizing. I do like any story that's and then she wiped his feet with her hair. That's why they wouldn't allow women to cut their hair back then, because they're like, that's some good foot washing hair. You better keep that on your head, girl. But I can't quite figure out why this was chosen for the women's Bible passage, because, it does show a little bit of the difference between Martha and Mary, because Mary is the one that actually does all the foot washing. So maybe that's why she picked it. But Elizabeth doesn't really specifically say. And I really wasn't able to get a whole lot as far as, purple-haired feminism stuff that I really tend to like.
But I guess the biggest takeaway from this is that Jesus also had grief at the loss of a friend. So instead of doing a miracle where he healed a blind person, was mentioned a little bit in this section, he cried out in tears to prove that his power was coming from beyond him, to those that were thinking it might be like a dark magic, which then, of course, led me back to what we've learned when we were reading about the Kabbalah, because I have since read a lot about the Kabbalah, and there's actual literal magic tied to that particular book of the Old Testament. So obviously there was a lot of kind of magical stuff happening at that time, which is funny because you think of it now as just like a sort of fringe thing. But apparently back in the time of Jesus, these soothsayers and necromancers were a big piece of this. So basically Jesus just wanted to prove that it wasn't him. I don't know. I think more of the story is that grief is powerful. Maybe. I could be wrong.
Joanna, you are never wrong. I think grief was definitely a part of it. But maybe Elizabeth was picking grief as a theme because the last passage in the coverage of the book of John is about Mary Magdalene coming to Jesus' tomb and seeing that at first she thinks he has been moved. So this is John 20. I'm sure this is kind of like Bible's greatest hits. But Mary comes and she's like, he's not here. And so she runs to get Simon Peter. And she's like, oh my God, he's not here. Someone moved him. And then when she comes back, she brings him back to the Sepultura, also another band name. Mary happens to see two angels in white sitting there. And the angels say unto her, woman, there it is again, woman. and they say unto her, woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. She was like, who is that? Because she didn't even know. Probably because she wasn't expecting it. Normalcy bias is a thing. But then he sees her, and he says to her, woman. So again, Elizabeth tried to warn us about this. She's like, you're going to hear a lot of woman here. But it's a thing. That's how they used to talk to women. It's totally cool. Jesus said unto her, woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? Even though, you know what? I got a problem with this already because I'm like, come on, dude. There was a bit of a hassle like 3 days ago, in case you weren't there. How can you not remember? But she's supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou hast borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. So she's talking to resurrected Jesus because she still just doesn't believe it. And Jesus is like, Mary, and he says her name, and she's like, oh my gosh. But Mary can see him, and the men aren't seeing Jesus or the angels. And that is the point that Elizabeth talks about in her response. Mary appears to have arrived at the Sepulchre before any of the other women and conversed with Jesus. Though the disciples, in visiting the tomb, saw nothing but cast-off clothes, yet Mary sees and talks with angels and with Jesus. As usual, the woman is always most ready to believe miracles and fables, however extravagant, and though beyond all human comprehension. The men who visited the tomb saw no visions, but all the women saw Jesus and the angels, though the men who went to the tomb twice saw nothing. Like, how come that isn't highlighted a lot about this story? Anyways. So Mary arrived at the tomb before light and waited for the other women, but seeing someone approaching, she supposed he was the person employed by Joseph. So she didn't even know, but we already talked about that. And for old-timey word stuff, Elizabeth also writes, filled with joy and with amazement, she called him Rabboni, which signifies teacher. And Jesus said unto her, touch me not. But I looked this up, and he was just mostly like, listen, I was just resurrected. So, you got to let the resurrection, sink in first. So that's what's up with that. Now, Elizabeth closes out her response by saying this finishes the consideration of the four Gospels, the direct recorded words of Jesus upon the question of purity. And all further references should harmonize in spirit with his teachings and should be so interpreted, without regard to contrary assertions by learned but unwise commentators. So she's setting up that they've gone through the four Gospels, and all of the rest of the New Testament should be in line with what Jesus, how he acts and how he says to honor God. And I do believe that that has been a point of contention among many Christians, where they'd be like, Jesus didn't say that, or like different books in the New Testament are really contradictory. So she's setting this up. She's letting us know that for the rest of the book, that's where her and her fellow Victorian feminist commentators are coming from. So after all of Elizabeth's commentary in those passages, we get a little treat, a short little essay from the anonymous writer. And again, I think this person is, keeps anonymous because they really like dig at some of these ideas, going back to digging at like Jesus was probably just like the son of Joseph, and the son of God thing is a bit of a stretch. She writes, I think there can be no reasonable doubt that such was the opinion of the authors of the original Gospels. Upon any other hypothesis, it is impossible to account for their having given the genealogy of Joseph to prove that Christ was one of the blood of David. The idea that he was the Son of God, or in any way miraculously produced, was an afterthought and is hardly entitled now to serious consideration. The Gospels were written so long after the death of Christ that very little was known of him. Oh, really? People seem to talk like they know him, though, of course. And we know substantially nothing of his parents. How is it that not one word is said about the death of Mary, not one word about the death of Joseph? How did it happen that Christ did not visit his mother after his resurrection? Okay. And then Anonymous writes something that I did not piece this together as a kid coming up in catechism. In the Bible, Jesus only talks to his mother 3 times. The first time he speaks to his mother is when he's 12 years old. His mother having told him that she and his father have been seeking him, he replied, "How is it that ye sought me?" The second time was at the marriage feast, and the third time was at the cross. And this is all. I did not know. There you go. So you also, and that is funny to me because we have a lot of, again, Christian nationalists and this whole like family values people taking over, and they're just talking about, honoring father and mother and the structure. And I'm like, well, Jesus didn't even talk to his mom. So
basically, Anonymous is saying, yeah, he was a great man, but I don't think he was like it. I think it was like a normal miracle, like all birth is. And because of that, shouldn't Mary have a bigger piece of the Bible? Why are we not honoring her? She raised him. Joseph as well. He's not mentioned either. Like even at the wedding, they were like, he's probably dead. He wasn't mentioned. We don't hear about his death. These are the people that made the Lord that we all see as the Son of God. And why wouldn't we want to know more about his parents and more stories? The very favorite part of this whole thing, because they give props to our Catholic Church. And I've never heard this said about the Catholic Church, this being the best thing. The best thing about the Catholic Church is the deification of Mary. And yet this is denounced by Protestantism. Protestants. I can't say it. Look at Protestantism as idolatry. There is something in the human heart that prompts man to tell his faults more freely to the mother than to the father. The cruelty of Jehovah is softened by the mercy of Mary. So Catholics have the mercy of Mary and a lot of great songs about her.
And that is true. The Catholics do have some really good Mary songs. And they even have a whole prayer dedicated to her. So Catholics did Mary right, which is also funny that they are like the worst. Well, I don't know if they're the worst, but they're top of the worst as far as letting females be in leadership positions or have any say over their own bodies. But, good on Mary. So Anonymous wraps up, and I'm going to read this paragraph here. It's a little bit of what Joanna was talking about, a little bit what I was talking about. We're all talking. Remember, in the sewing circle here. Is it not strange that none of the disciples of Christ said anything about their parents? That we know nothing of them? Is there any evidence that they showed any particular respect even for the mother of Christ? Ooh, snap. It's true. We don't know. Were they nice to Mary? Or were they just saying like, woman? Mary Magdalene is in many respects the tenderest and most loving character in the New Testament. According to the account, her love for Christ knew no abatement, no change, true even in the hopeless shadow of the cross. Neither did it die with his death. She waited at the sepulchre. She hastened in the early morning to his tomb, and yet the only comfort Christ gave to this true and loving soul lies in these strangely cold and heartless words. Touch me not. I love that Anonymous was like, why so cold? Why you gotta be so cruel? As I mentioned before, I heard some other accounts that the touch me not because he was in like a fragile state. But still, I even thought the same thing rereading that passage where I'm like, why was he letting her believe that she was the gardener? And why didn't he say something like, if I came back from the dead, I would assume that people would be shocked. And instead, I'm like, was he toying with her? I don't know. I appreciate that this book did highlight Mary Magdalene quite a bit because we've had some people suggest that there are some books about or even by Mary Magdalene that she really never got her due. In fact, her gospel supposedly was hidden, but that's something that we can uncover maybe in a whole nother season of Biting All the Apples. So there you go. As Elizabeth said in her wrap-up, we've covered the 4 main Gospels. So in our next episode, we're bringing back our co-host act. We're bringing it back together for the Book of Acts. Get it? See, without Joanna, I'm just a lost pun at sea. You know what I mean? It's no fun. It's no pun. But we would love to hear from you. We've got different ways you can do that. You can check out our YouTube, our TikTok. You can message us there. If you look in the show description, the show notes, aka show description, aka show notes, that will direct you to the links of where you can leave us a voicemail or send us a text message. We'd love to hear what you've thought of these first 20 episodes. And maybe we should go in a whole new direction. Maybe we should just AI the rest of it. Is anybody listening? Hello, 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 hello. No, we do know that people are listening, and we appreciate it so very much. I cannot stress how important it is to support independent media during these times, even since last week when I mentioned that more leftist voices, feminist voices, and this independent media, we are really getting suppressed. And it's so important that we're able to get the word out about this stuff, to start conversations, to make people see things in a different way. One of the things that I think we are all sorely lacking is imagination. We can get so stuck in the terror and the fear and the uncertainty that we don't allow ourselves to really, like we say, like expanding knowledge, like think of new ways. We have to create the hopeful world. We have to envision it. We have to know that just because things have been written away 2,000 years ago, we don't have to keep doing the same thing. And people that are creating independent media are trying to do that. Ways to support us and other, independent podcasters, but us first, hello, is, you can leave reviews, share a link to our podcast on your social media. You can even put it in your email signature, text it to your friends. Anytime you subscribe on podcasting platforms, that all really helps. But we really appreciate you listening, and we hope you have a week full of woman. I'm just kidding. Have a lovely week.